welcome to Mikkel to the stage all the way from New York. He's been with us from early morning today, but I let Nikolai introduce your work and really look forward to your reading.
Thank you.
Yes, we've been lucky enough to have Mikkel here today read an excerpt from his short story, The Mating Call. Mikkel is the recipient of the Danish Arts Foundation's Unge Kunstneriske Elite Award. His writing has been published in 5 languages and has appeared in Art 21, Book Forum, Magazine, Guernica, McSweeney's Quarterly, Weekendavisen, Vagant, amongst others. He grew up in Elsinore, Denmark, and lives in New York City. And his first novel, The Invention of Anna, came out in 2018 and is available from Custom House and HarperCollins. And we're very happy to have you here, Mikkel, and very much looking forward to having a reading by you. I'll leave the floor to you.
Thank you, Nikolai and Aliyah, and thank you so much for the invitation. Is everything okay here with the sound? Can people hear me?
It's fine. Just to say briefly, I'm going to share your image shortly.
Great. Yeah, it was really great hearing the other readings this morning and just following the whole conference. I'm a fiction writer, and coming from the literary world of contemporary literary fiction, it's really exciting to hear people talk so much about mysticism and the connections between ecology and technology and spirituality, which is something that is not being touched upon very much in contemporary literature, which is still very sort of obsessed with the realism and with autofiction. So I think it's so exciting to hear all these ideas that's been presented here today. In my writing, I'm mostly interested in how the internet and technology is re-enchanting our world, and how we are entering a new age of animism and shamanism and mysticism. So I'll read for about 10 minutes from the story, The Mating Call, which I have it here, was published by McSweeney's Quarterly, and was also published in Denmark by Atlas Magazine, who made this beautiful little illustration of this bird here. Here goes. On the internet, as you probably know, there was a copy of a South Seas island where everything was rendered in natural size and so lifelike that it looked like the genuine thing. The real island is one of the prettiest in the world, a landscape of swaying palm trees, white sand beaches, teeming coral reefs under an azure sea, and so far away and so difficult to reach that only the very rich can get there. That is precisely why the art collector commissioned the copy. He wanted everyone to see it, even the poor who never have a chance to travel. On the art collector's island, you could see all the wonders of the South Seas. Waves lapped gently against the beach. The sky was ever blue. Yes, the island was so artfully rendered and stretched so far that not even the animator had been to all its corners. In the jungle, you could see the strangest orchids. Monkeys howled from the canopy, and if you kept on walking, a path led up through the hills to a caldera lake that was deep and blue. Old trees were mirrored in the water, and among the branches lived an oo bird, who sang so wistful a mating call that even a young gamer, playing a tournament late at night, stopped his game and listened when he heard the oo calling from the open tab. Holy shit, what a beautiful song, he said. Visitors came from all around the internet to admire the island's beaches and jungles and the caldera lake. And if they happened to hear the mating call, they breathed, beautiful. The visitors told their followers about the extraordinary island. They posted videos of the beaches and the jungles, but nothing was shared more often than the OO's mating call. Those videos spread across the world, and some of them eventually reached the art collector. He sat in his Art Foundation study, scrolling and scrolling as he nodded approvingly, because he believed in truth and nature, and nothing pleased him more than to share the true beauty of the South Seas. Whoa, that mating call, said the top comment. That's the prettiest thing I ever heard. What is this all about, said the art collector. A mating call? And supposedly the best thing on my entire island? And then he opened a window to the island and walked from the beach up the hills to the caldera lake. When he reached the shore, he noticed a melancholy little warble. Sure enough, it was the oo singing its mating call so longingly that the art collector drew a deep breath. Tears crept into his eyes, and then the oo song sounded even sadder and more wistful. The art collector sighed and thought about all the poor people who lived among such ugly things and would never have heard so beautiful a song if it hadn't been for his generosity. "I've never heard anything so beautiful," said the art collector. "And to think that this is just a copy. The whole internet loves the online bird, but I would like to hear the genuine thing." The art collector chartered a flight and flew the long way to the island in the South Seas. And because he was such a generous man, he invited his colleagues and family to come along. The first day, they saw the beaches and the coral reefs. "Ah," said the museum director, "I know this place. It feels exactly like I've been here before." The second day, they saw the jungle. "Gorgeous," said the critic. "I'm seeing it for the first time, but it's like a déjà vu." The third day, they visited the caldera lake. "Down here," cried the art collector's granddaughter when they reached the ridge. "Look, look, now we'll hear the birdie." And off she ran down the path toward the shore, where ancient trees were mirrored in the lake. "No luck today, I guess," said the museum director when they had circled the lake without hearing the mating call. "Dear little oo," whispered the granddaughter. Come along, we wish only to hear your pretty song." But there was no mating call to be heard, only the wind whistling in the trees. The next day, the art collector sent his personal assistant to get advice on how they could hear the oo song. But where was the mating call to be found? The PA ran up and down streets, in and out of travel agencies. Not a single person she met knew where she could hear the oo song. The PA ran back to the art collector and said that the mating call must be a feature fabricated by the animator. That's how it goes with game designers. You should not believe everything they animate. It's all invention and what's called Easter eggs. "Easter eggs," said the art collector. "No, my island is an exact copy of the real island. If there's no oo in real life, there should not be one online." And then the art collector called the animator, who was so busy with his rigging and modeling that he did not hear the phone ring. "But the animator has won prizes and grants for his accurate depictions," the art collector said. "So it has to be real. No, I want to hear that mating call." "Of course," said the PA, and once again she searched the island for the strange bird that the whole internet knew about, but no one had laid eyes on. Finally, deep in the jungle, the PA met a poor old woman. The woman said, "Ah, yes, the oo, of course. I knew him very well." The old woman told the story of the oo. When white people arrived, they brought mosquitoes to the island. With the mosquitoes, diseases arrived. Every year birds died, and in the end only a single oo was left. "He lived up by the lake in a tree hollow before he died," said the old lady. "And when I walked home in the evening, I would hear him calling for his mate. I had to sit and whistle a reply, because the song of the oo is a duet, and no mate would ever answer his call." Back at the hotel, the art collector nodded slowly as he listened to the story. Tears gathered in his eyes, for he knew what it was like to call out for the one you love and never receive a reply. "Was anyone ever as lonesome as that poor oo?" asked the art collector over dinner, and the museum director and the critic shook their heads as sadly as they could. The next morning, the art collector woke up with a new idea. "I will resurrect the mating call," he said, because he had always believed in conserving nature and in love as well. Back in his study at the Art Foundation, he posted an open call and promised that any artist who could figure out how to recreate the mating call on the island in the South Seas would receive a prize. In studios across the world, sculptors and animators and video artists considered how to solve the problem. Solar-powered speakers? Robotic birds? The whole art world gossiped about the strange assignment. Even the critical theorists and radical decolonialists were excited, and that is saying a lot, because they were rarely pleased. One day, after many months, a courier delivered a package to the art collector. The label said, "Mating Call." And I think we'll stop the reading here and just say that the art collector and these artists, they're able to bring the mating call back to the physical island, where it ends up intermingling with the birds of the island. And from that intermingling, a new kind of mating call emerges. This story is the first story in a new body of work I've been working on since my last novel came out in 2017. And this new body of work deals with what I would call the re-enchantment of the world. And I think I'll spend the last like few minutes just talking about this project and these things I see going on in literature and in the wider world. So in some ways, this new body of work is something I've been at work on sort of my whole life in some ways. Like so many people of my generation, I grew up mostly on the internet. I played hours and hours and hours of video games. I spent just as many hours in chat rooms and visiting bizarre blogs. And I found out at some time in my early teenage years that you could change your skin, your identity online. In chat rooms, I would become a woman. I would correspond with strangers for months behind this woman's avatar as some way of, I don't know, like exploring what the other gender thought and felt like. But at this point in my life, I didn't feel that any of these sort of interactions were particularly impactful. It was, at the end of the day, it was just a game, because the binary between the online world and the AFK away from keyboard world was very clearly demarcated. Once I got up from the computer, the game had ended, and I was back in physical reality and in my own physical body. Um, but then in 2010, when I first moved to New York, I started noticing how this online shapeshifting I had engaged in as a teenager was not just a game anymore and no longer just role playing. I saw it like again and again in the people I met. I had a job working doing manual labor for these fashion shows, and in the fashion world, I saw again and again how people would use their phones and the internet to create this persona for themselves and then become this persona, opening all kinds of opportunities to themselves. And I had this friend Alicia, who grew up with a single mother in a low-income family in a small town in middle rural Illinois. And as a young teenager, she created this identity for herself as what they call an age player on Tumblr. So on Tumblr, she created this different name for herself that embodied a different and younger age than her physical body, where she was basically like enacting that she was still a child. And by sharing photos and videos of herself living out this age-playing role, she amassed a following of more than 50,000 people. And by selling access to these images and videos of herself, she paid her way through college, the first in her family to go to college. And through the community she met on Tumblr, she was able to move from Illinois to New York City, where she eventually landed a job, an apartment, and eventually married a university professor. So this is just one example of this sort of new breed of American coming of age stories that I saw all around me. How young people were able to break out of their class, their gender, their age groups, armed only with their phone. That the phone was kind of this portal that you could shapeshift through. So it was kind of this Pygmalion transformation, like in the myth of Pygmalion, where you created not a sculpture but a figure online, and then that figure became alive. Like you became that figure you had created online. So in these years, I was really deeply fascinated about this. It was kind of like seeing this famous Walt Whitman quote, "I am large, I contain multitudes, come alive in this very real way." And it seemed very empowering to me. It seemed like the beginning of a kind of a weirder, richer life, where by traversing screens, we could not only split ourselves into two or exist in more places than one time, but we could also have doubles or several selves, like crosses between our own physical bodies and the images of our bodies on the screen. So at this time I was trying to write about this in this quite positive, empowering way. But then around 2016, something started changing, where, well, first of all, this screen traversing was no longer just confined to the worlds of gaming and blogging and fashion, but the average American was at this point spending 7 hours per day looking at screens. So we were quite literally spending as much time on our screens as we did away from it. So this like clearly demarcated boundary between being on screen and off screen was evaporating. We were constantly during the day, like hundreds and hundreds of times, going in and out of these two worlds. They were being entangled, like the binary had basically disappeared. And it was having some very real effects of our off screen lives. To take the most obvious example, would be the Trump election. We had the Russian troll factories, we had the weaponization of Reddit to spread Trump propaganda. Later on, we had the vaccine denials, QAnon, and so on and so on. So what it seems to me is, just to wrap up, that the fantasies we created online was being enacted in reality, but no longer just in this empowered way as an act of a liberated non-binary individual like Alicia. And now it was more these darker instincts of our collective unconsciousness, fear, anger, paranoia, violence that was coming out. So basically, yeah, I feel like it feels like an ungrounding, like we're entering a kind of a re-enchanted world, where knowledge is circulating not so much through hierarchies, books, and academics anymore, but they're being transmitted through myths, rumors, viral images, and videos, and so on. So we're kind of returning to a medieval or pre-modern world, and that is kind of what I'm trying to write about in this new body of work.
Hey, hi, Mikkel. Thank you so much for your reading. If we have a few minutes, I had tons of questions, but perhaps I could ask at least one or two.
Definitely.
So I wanted actually to go back to your story for a minute, which intertwines in curious ways fiction and reality. And it's one of the stories that made me think of how art and fiction are sometimes more real than reality. And in this particular case, the OO bird actually did exist, and it did actually go extinct. And the song of the OO bird was recorded, I believe, back in the 70s or so. And as you well know, there is actually an artwork by Jakob Gustafsson, which references, or not references, is built around the story of a OO bird. And yeah, and there are a few directions in which I could take my babbling from here. But I guess one thing I wanted to ask is on your work with artists and on, artworks as being this sort of gate through which you can glimpse the unconditioned futuralities and how you incorporate this into your fiction. And I was also thinking this in the context of, there are artists, artists who inspire a lot of other artists. And I believe Hilma af Klint, who I'm fascinated with, is one of them. And I thought of you as perhaps an artist writer, a writer who constantly engages with art practice, I'm sure, who inspires just as many artists in return. So perhaps you could speak a little bit to that.
Yeah, I've been writing about art for the last 7-8 years. So I'm very much engaged with the visual art world, and it's where I get a lot of my inspiration from. And like you said, the OO bird, it's both part of Jakob Gustafsson's work, and I've worked quite closely with Jakob. I've written about his work. I've done some performances with him. But this OO bird was also it's also a meme that has often showed up on Reddit and other places in different ways. So it's one of these little cultural myths that keep like circulating. But yeah, I feel like for the visual art is really rich place for me to go as a writer. I often feel like new ideas are first being formulated in the sciences, and then very quickly after, almost simultaneously, being worked at in the visual artwork. It's almost like it's quicker. The turnaround is quicker, and then literature comes like uh, running after like 10 years later or something. Both probably because it takes a long time to write a novel. And maybe there's also just, I don't know, it's a different ecosystem there. So for me, it's always been very interesting to engage with visual artists and write about it because they're kind of like more engaged with the newest things. Like the turnover of creating a visual art piece is often just a few months or even a few weeks. So you can kind of have some debates there that are a little more prescient than you have in the literary world. And then I also just think it's kind of sad that these two worlds live in these silos. There's very little overlap between them. So that's also something I'm interested in, just creating a little more talk between these two worlds, have them engage a little more.
Your remarks after you read the story made me think of course, that internet is the biggest garden and the biggest dump that we can possibly think of. And it's a theme we haven't engaged with so much in this particular conference. So I'm grateful for you for bringing up this remarks. Jakob Wamberg is asking on a chat, is your story a sort of Cyborgian rephrasing of Hans Christian Andersen's The Nightingale?
I mean, it is clearly like referencing Hans Christian Andersen very clearly. So what I basically wanted to do with this story, that was the starting point. My parents had like an illustrated version of The Nightingale growing up, and it always meant a lot to me, this story. But I never really liked it as a child. Like it was always lodged in my memory, but there's something about it I somehow didn't really engage with or like with. So yeah, I kind of wanted to write an answer to that story. And Hans Christian Andersen, who was a romantic, was writing in this very binary way of like the natural world and God and so on, and then the fake, artificial world of humans. So I kind of wanted to write a response to this fairy tale, a non-binary response where the two worlds intermingle and get mushed up. So it's not like one is better or more real or more of, that you should yearn of the one and reject the artificial, but kind of more talking about what happens when these two things get intermingled. What kind of world, what kind of future are we walking towards when you can no longer distinguish these two, when the artificial and the real, or the human and the natural, gets completely entangled and ends up in this loop together. So it was not so much a rephrasing, but an answer to that story, and also an homage. I mean, I have admire him so much, Hans Christian Andersen. The irony and the humor and the sharpness of his prose is just genius.
In relation to your interest in mysticism and shamanism, I was just reading recently that the word mysterious comes from the Greek muein, which means to close the lips. And it denotes the fact that things unspeakable. So I think for you as a writer, it's quite interesting to think about something which is unspeakable.
Mm.
And in contrast, technology, it's all about subjecting being to calculation and control, and sort of the underlying assumption there that only that which is calculable is real. So perhaps the mysticism and technology, the two opposites of your interest, they're not unlike the garden dump juxtaposition. And I was curious how you're interested in both of those poles.
Yeah, I think, I mean, sorry to drag in a whole nother metaphorical world, but like I have found it very helpful to think in these ways of mysticism and this return to kind of like a mystical way of thinking through technology in the metaphors used by Norse mythology. So you were probably all familiar, but just to really quickly summarize, like in the Norse mythology, there are two houses of gods. There are the Jotuns, who are the nature gods. They represent nature, chaos, sexuality. And then there are the Aesir, who represent culture, thought, reproduction through handicrafts, and so on. And in between these two houses of gods is this god Loki, and he's kind of a sort of a trickster, not quite, but somewhat. And he is a Jotun, but he lives with the Aesir. So he's like born of nature, but he lives with the human culture. And it is the ex of Loki. Loki is a shapeshifter. He like turns himself into a seal, a fly, a salmon. He does all these tricks on both the houses of gods, and it is his actions that end up leading to the Ragnarok, the apocalypse, the end of this binary world where you had the nature and the humans. That world falls down because of the actions of this Loki god, and then a new world arises from the ashes of that. And I often think about it like that we are living in this sort of age of the trickster, or this Loki age, where technology is playing the role of this trickster. Like it is technology and the internet that is constantly playing these roles out against each other, and that is doing all these actions that are leading us towards the destruction of this binary world, and towards a newer world, whatever that means, and whatever is in that new world. Even in Norse mythology, it's kind of like it's vague what comes after. And I think that's kind of where we are now, where we're trying to figure out, everyone here at this conference, where we're heading, and how can we use these older modes of thought to kind of like chart our way forward.
Wherever we are in the middle, as Michael Marder mentioned last night. So I think with this, unfortunately, we have to finish the session. I wish we could speak for much longer. Super grateful, Mikkel, for your intervention. Do read Mikkel's book, and also the story is actually available. The whole story is available on our website. Mikkel very generously shared it. So if you want to read the whole story, you can go to gardendump.com and download it. We were supposed to have a 10-minute break before the next session, and accidentally I managed to shorten it into a 2-minute break. But perhaps we could take this short moment before we reconvene in 3-4 minutes to hear Simone Kotler's talk.